Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Clouds, Edge to Edge Transformation. And as we have talked about earlier, there is a transformation going on all around the world. The Zoom call that I'm on, the microphones, these I picked up literally on a hop on, hop off bus because I find that it's convenient to change it and AI takes care of the rest. But as Rick and I were talking about, who's going to do the filtering inside here, the inner transformation, and how do we take all the stimulus? It's good that we get excited, that keeps us perked up. But when we're upset, how can we take care of that? And that's where I have amazing friends like Rick, who have helped me through the years, through his books on the science of happiness. Rick, tell us about you. How did you become the Rick Hanson we all know today? Or were you born like this?
Well, I'm reminded of a saying, no self, no problem. I would say two things were really central for me. One, when I was very young, like many people, I think, I had a sense of a lot of unnecessary unhappiness around me. I lived in a nice middle class American family, nice loving parents, and still there was a lot of worry, a lot of irritation, a lot of pressure and hassling, a lot of criticism. I saw adults to kids, adults to adults, kids to kids. And inside myself, when I look back on my early memories, there was a kind of wistful longing to understand why. Why do we need to do this? What can we do to have it be different? I did not know what to do about it. I was 3 years old or 13 years old, but it was real for me. Second, when I was 15, I was a shy kid. I have a very late birthday and I skipped a grade. So I was about a year and a half younger than most kids going through school. And I felt like an outsider. No one wanted me. I was very awkward. And by the time I was 15, I was very unhappy, very preoccupied with myself. And I know I was 15 because I was reading the book Dune at the time, whose main character, Paul Muad'Dib, is 14 or 15 when the book starts. And I identified with him, and I identified a lot with the training tradition of his mother, the Bene Gesserit, which is about self-development. And right around that time, I had an epiphany. I realized that I could not change the past, I could not change the present in the moment, but I could change my future. I could continually, each day, learn a little, grow a little, let go a little, heal a little, and become a little stronger, a little happier, a little more skillful, a little wiser. And that really started me on my path of interest in how do we grow the good that lasts inside ourselves. Not the passing good of a momentary experience, but the gradual development of various traits like resilience, grit, emotional intelligence, compassion, self-compassion, and so forth. And then I went off to college soon after at 16 and caught the wave of the human potential movement in 1969 and onward, and then got a Ph.D. in psychology with a lot of training in brain science and the contemplative traditions, particularly early Buddhism, that particular tradition, which I then integrated in my book, Buddhism, the combination really of clinical psychology, contemplative wisdom, and modern brain science. But at bottom, I'm really interested in what you think about this yourself, because you have lived this way too. At bottom, we need more than a growth mindset. We need a growth toolkit so that we can help ourselves, in my case, increasingly grounded in an understanding of the nervous system and how to change it for the better in lasting ways. How do we help ourselves grow more of the good that lasts for our business, for our marriages, for our families, for our friendships, and for our inner world? How do we do that every day? So that's been a huge major focus of my work, and I've gotten some of those benefits myself along the way.
That sounds exciting. Now, you mentioned something about unnecessary unhappiness.
Yeah.
It's widely believed that once you are a millionaire, things become easier. That was in the 60s and 70s. And now it's 1,000 times bigger. Once you're a billionaire, then
Uh,
things are much easier. What do
yeah.
you think about that thesis?
Uh, it's very complicated. There's good research about it, and let's remember that research is always typically about the average of groups, and there are many individual differences. It does seem like adding wealth, even past the level of, in America, a median income of about $70,000 a year. Increments past that, right, do seem to help a little bit, but their impact becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. On the other hand, we're very able to increase our well-being and our sense ultimately of inner peace. I think of the process that moves from healing to growing to awakening. And we are definitely very able to take actions that improve our sense of inner peace and contentment and unconditional love, even if our well-being related to material circumstances is fairly stagnant, because the next $1 million, the next $1 billion is nice, it's great, but it doesn't tend to produce major increases in your kind of resting state well-being. But inner development can actually keep raising the ultimate aim of all this, which is your own experience of living in this life and your own capacity to be of service to the world. Those can definitely increase with inner practice.
I've read some of your books on the science of happiness.
Yeah.
Clearly, you integrate neuroscience with contemplative practices. How do you correlate the science and contemplative practices, whether it's from Buddhism or Judaism or Christianity? Are they related? There was a time when it was believed that you should not believe in this unproven practices. So what's your experience having done so much research in both?
First point, evidence of mental change is evidence of neural change. The two are correlated together. Mental activity enlists underlying patterns of neural activity that are physical, and repeated patterns of neural activity leave lasting traces behind in altered structure and function in your nervous system. That's how we learn to walk when we were little, or as adults, hopefully, learn how to stay out of stupid arguments with people with whom there's no cheese down that tunnel. So we learn, and that learning must involve some kind of underlying change in the physical body, particularly the brain. So if people, let's say, meditate a little bit and they feel better, there's a passing change in the brain. If they meditate fairly regularly and they notice they're getting calmer, they're more resilient, they take things less personally, they recover, they come back to baseline faster, they're more able to be effective and skillful at work, they're more able to separate from harsh self-criticism that prevents them from being as ambitious as they really could be, well, they've observed a change in their mind. That must involve an underlying change in the brain. Now, after thousands of years of people engaging in systematic mental training, mainly in the contemplative traditions, and then in the last 100 years, also through clinical psychology, and now increasingly coaching. These changes that we observe, we recognize in ourselves, are being increasingly documented by hardcore, rigorous science, which confirms and is helpful. It's reassuring to realize that, oh yeah, what you're doing is actually changing your brain. And at this point, there's a tremendous amount of evidence for the impact of meditation, typically in the form of mindfulness meditation or transcendental meditation. Those are the two that have been most studied. Some other forms of meditation are also being studied, and mindfulness in general has been really studied, as well as some deliberate cultivation of things like compassion and kindness. So these have been studied. Of all the psychological interventions, all the forms of mental training, the one that's been most studied, interestingly, is the airiest and the fairiest, because a lot of meditators who also happen to be hardcore professors at elite universities, they wanted to research this. And I'll tell you 4 findings that really stand out, really solid. Regular meditative practice or regular deliberate mindfulness is associated with 4 major changes in the brain that relate to 4 functions. First is the function of regulating attention. So if a person wants to be able to focus, sustain concentration, and also to pull their attention away from what's not helpful, like ruminating about this or that, or beating themselves up about the past, well, mindfulness training is really helpful there because it builds up structure, literally, in prefrontal regions and other areas of the brain that top-down regulate attention. Second, body awareness. The insula is a key part of the brain on the inside of the temporal lobes, and the insula builds tissue as people practice meditation in which they're aware of themselves, they're aware of their breathing, they're aware of their body, they're in the present. Literally, neurons that fire together, wire together, they build tissue there. And body awareness is really useful because it's a primary source of information about other people and situations. People become more effective as leaders, including at the highest level, as they become more in touch with themselves and can use what they're in touch with as useful information. That's great. Third major benefit is regulation of emotions and impulsive action. Prefrontal regions behind the brain that are executive functions, they regulate the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala better. Also, tissue gets added to a nearby part of the brain called the hippocampus when people meditate regularly. And the hippocampus helps us put things in context and in the present. It also supports memory, which is useful. And the hippocampus inhibits the amygdala. It's kind of like, calm down, alarm bell. It's not as bad as you think it is, right? That's useful. So we become more centered, we develop greater emotional intelligence. One of the benefits of that also is we can become more skillfully empathic for others. As we become more aware of ourselves related to changes in our brain, we become more able to really apply that understanding to other people too, which again is really, really helpful when you're working as part of a team or a leader. And then last, the sense of self starts to change as well. Midline cortical networks in the kind of center of the brain up toward the top. If you had one of those haircuts sticking up out of your head, it would be coming out of that part. Anyway, activity in that midline is associated with the sense of self, often a sense of self as contracted, separated, pressured, beleaguered, and even addictive. So when we meditate consistently, activity in the midline tends to get quieter as we build up neural tissue on the side of the brain, especially the right hemisphere for right-handed people. Point being, that's associated with not taking things so personally, being able to see the big picture and have more of an expansive sense of yourself as connected with everything, life altogether, the earth altogether, reality altogether, and supported and buoyed by it rather than separated and at war with it. So in sum, a little bit makes a little bit of difference. Consistent practice makes a lot of difference. And I think that fundamentally, some kind of meditative practice, the best one is the one you'll actually do. Just like exercise, the best exercise is the one you'll actually do. So meditation is to the mind, aerobic activity is to the body. It's a fundamental foundation for long-term health.
Meditation has made a huge difference in my life over the last 20 years, and I'm very grateful. One of the beliefs in the industry, especially in startups and highly competitive spaces, is that meditation is going to slow you down, make you more contented. So you won't be competitive anymore. You won't have that drive to succeed. What do you think about that?
It's a great question. I mean, it's a reasonable fear, and I think it's completely unfounded. There are many people who are top performers who quietly say, oh yeah, I meditate some and it really helps me. So it hasn't slowed them down. It might make you and help you to be a little more in touch with yourself so you're more able to honor what really matters to you and not get so swept along in chasing one brass ring after another. So that might be good for you actually in the long term, even if in the short you're not quite so panicked and quite so driven on any particular day. But being super intense and contracted and driven might work for the short term, but long term it leads us to burnout. The broader point I'd like to make has to do with autonomy and competence. These are two values in business, right? Being the boss of yourself. Well, if we're not able to regulate our own thoughts and feelings, if we're not able to be influential and to exercise agency inside our own being, well, we're at effect then. We're like a stick in a raging river, swept along by one reaction or another. So being able to grab power, claim power for oneself, to be a leader of yourself is fundamental And meditation certainly is helpful for that. Mindfulness is helpful for that. And the broad process that I was talking about in the very beginning of, like Paul Madib, help yourself learn along the way. Deliberately focus on what you're attempting to grow inside yourself very deliberately by experiencing it and then internalizing it in that basic two-step process that I've written a lot about. That's really fundamental, and that's an exercise of agency. The other is, like I said, competence. It's so interesting, Shankar. I see people who are highly focused on being externally competent. They want to learn how to drive their car. They want to get good at technology outside of themselves in a variety of ways, but they don't really think about being competent in where it matters most, in their inner being, in their own psychology, in who they are becoming. It's kind of like I'll sometimes say to teenagers, well, if you really want to be incompetent or clueless or unskillful with your own mind, that's up to you. But if you'd like to become more skillful in how you influence who you are becoming, well, there's some useful things you can know. I just want to kind of underline that point. I think there's a kind of a critique sometimes of these sort of soft skills as airy-fairy, or that's for yoga camp. When I retire, I'll maybe think about that stuff. Okay, well, if you're interested in being autonomous and a leader and captain of your own ship in life, and if you're interested in skillfulness with the one thing it matters most to be skillful about, your own mind, well, there's a lot you can learn from meditation and mindfulness and related that I explore with people.
Rick, indeed, it's a joy to hear that from you. I've read several books on the mind and particularly the neuroscience of how we can be emotionally intelligent. You said that the growth mindset alone is not enough. We need a growth toolkit. What kind of tools are we talking about here?
Yeah. So let's work backwards from what you want to grow inside. Let's suppose that a person wants to develop more confidence or wants to develop certain kinds of skills as a leader or wants to develop more sense of self-worth deep down inside, or maybe wants to develop more patience, frankly, with their family. That's often the place that it's hardest to be patient. Okay, now you're trying to develop something. How do you grow the good that lasts inside? Neurologically, it's a two-step process, and people routinely forget the second step. First, you must experience what you want to grow inside. You have to feel it. You want to grow more confidence, grow more patience, grow more self-compassion. You have to feel it. Second step, crucially important, you have to help that passing experience leave a lasting trace in your brain. Otherwise, it washes through your brain like water through a sieve. Meanwhile, because of the brain's evolved negativity bias, which makes it like Velcro for bad experiences, but Teflon for good ones, our negative experiences of frustration, self-criticism, disappointment, irritation, and so on, those get hardwired really quickly. So what you can do deliberately in terms of this second step, and this is crucially important to the extent that we're interested in training staff or helping the people in our company develop various qualities themselves, it's really important to pay attention to that second step. It's easy to have experiences. You meditate, you watch a video, you listen to a talk, you observe a YouTube, get inspired from a TEDx talk. Great. What's the lasting value? Dirty secret is that most of those experiences wash right through the brain. So if you want to help them stick, I have a published paper about this. It's called Learning to Learn from Positive Experiences, and it lists 8 neurologically based methods that we can use ourselves that actually increase the conversion rate. It's sort of like return on investment on the experiences we're having. It's the ROI on our experiences in terms of lasting change for the better. So these 8 include obvious things like stay with the experience for a breath or longer. If neurons that fire together can wire together, the longer they fire together, the more they tend to wire together. Stay with it for a breath or 2 or 3 in a row. Or feel it in your body. The more that experience is sensory and somatic, the more it tends to be registered. Feel it in the body. Don't just have the idea that people appreciate you. Help yourself feel appreciated in your body and stay with it. Nobody needs to know you're doing it in the board meeting or the staff meeting. You can look the same and all cool and polished on the outside, but on the inside, you're taking it in. Why not help yourself? Or third, since more dopamine and norepinephrine are released when we experience reward, which highlights the experiences of the time for protection as they get converted and consolidated into long-term storage. This third method is when you're experiencing something you want to grow, which could be a fairly mild experience, but it's real. Be aware of what's enjoyable about it or what's meaningful about it, because that will heighten activity of dopamine and norepinephrine in your hippocampus, which is the front end of the general process of experiences being gradually woven into the neural nets of memory. So those are 3 out of the 8. We have the capacity to help ourselves steepen our learning curve, steepen our growth curve as we go through each day. That increment, that incremental, that delta, that improvement in our growth curve as we go through the day, based on the deliberate internalization of experiences, might be fairly small on that particular day. But that gradual accumulation, day after day after day after day, of that delta, that increment, can really make the difference over the course of a career and certainly over the course of a year and even a month.
Yes, practice makes us perfect. So we have to keep practicing. Now, with the new technologies, as we mentioned earlier, whether streaming technologies, the ability to work together, there's so much going on, whether it's the recordings. I learned a lot about your work from your YouTube videos and many other technologies. In the external world, we are making tremendous progress. What's happening in the internal world? We seem to have the same issues that are there in the Bible, that are there even in the times of Alexander the Great. So, have we not transformed in our internal world? Are we the same old people that we were 5,000 years ago?
Wow. Well, you're asking very profound questions. To just recap the obvious, but for this setting the table here, as humans, we're animals. We're the product of about 3.5 or more billion years of evolution. The nervous system has been evolving for 600 million years. Our species, people like you and I, Shankar, have walked this planet for 300,000 years. Wow. And during much of that time, we lived in our small bands in which we spent our whole lives with the same 40 or 50 people, and we needed to cooperate with each other. So we related to each other, scientists have shown, on the basis of what's called caring and sharing, distinct from the strategy of holding and controlling of other primate species. Alpha domination, in other words. But inside the band, we lived on the basis, really broadly, of compassion and justice. Then, historically, agriculture came along, produced large surpluses that enabled larger populations and growing concentrations of wealth and power. And that's been the story of the last 10,000 years. For most people's lives, a lot like Game of Thrones. And there was a regression to that primitive atavistic strategy of holding and controlling alpha dominance that we moved away from caring and sharing. The opportunity today is to use technology to help ourselves come together, frankly, a global scale. That's one reason I founded the Global Compassion Coalition. Help ourselves come together at a global scale to return to locating and placing compassion and justice really at the foundation of all our societies, much as our ancestors did and is in our true biological nature. So that's kind of big picture. And it's really helpful to appreciate that we have Stone Age brains. Now, I like technology. I'm a total science fiction. I'm really looking forward to technology. I enjoy it. But we did not evolve to process the incoming baud rate of so much stimulation. We did not evolve to multitask in the ways we're called to these days. We did not evolve to have to shift frames or set as rapidly as we do these days. And that can over time create what's called allostatic load. It's stressful for people. So for me, technology is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. And so then the question becomes, how do we make sure that we are the masters ourselves of technology and that we regulate powerful forces, governments, sometimes individuals, that want to use technology to master us? And I think we need to act collectively to continue to make sure that that doesn't happen. There are many stories about letting the genie out of the bottle and you can't get the genie back in. It's a cautionary tale for humanity that we need to be very careful, particularly AI and the ultimate possibility of genuinely sentient AI systems embedded in our global information networks that might be indifferent, if not malevolent, regarding humanity. I mean, that's an enormous topic. I'm not a scholar of it, but I think that's a genuine concern.
Very true. Fortunately, AI, artificial intelligence, has also been with us almost 70 plus years,
Yeah,
and it hasn't made a big difference.
yeah.
But the risk is very real
I'm
among
thinking of the
intelligence.
1,000-year view. 1,000 years, I mean, I'm looking over your shoulder there in Carmel in the Pacific Ocean. People like you and I were walking there, certainly for roughly nearly the last 20,000 years, right? And so if we're not even 20,000 years into the future, but 200 years into the future, what might be the
Yes.
case? Yeah.
And it is a huge responsibility to make sure whatever we create out of these intelligent machines, we do it in a way that is meaningful to the living species. You mentioned about holding and controlling,
Yeah.
which is very common in the animal kingdom, versus caring and sharing. Now, a lot of us were taught Darwinism when we were growing up in school. The way often Darwinism is interpreted is survival of the fittest means the one who gets to dominate. Is it changing? What is the latest in survival
Yeah.
theory?
Oh, this is a huge topic, and there's evolution both at the level of individuals and at the level of groups and species altogether. And so, for example, cooperation is actually quite common in the animal kingdom, in which individuals will sacrifice themselves for the sake of the group. I mean, it's common in insects and it's common in other situations too. And as humans evolved, they developed altruism, which is fairly unique in the animal kingdom. And that's because they lived together and gradually developed a social brain that could both recognize injustice and punish freeloaders. Chimpanzees, gorillas, they are generally not altruistic. They're going to hold on to their banana because there's no guarantee that if I share my banana with you today, you'll share yours with me tomorrow when I'm hungry. But humans gradually developed a capacity to retain the memory of who was kind and helpful and so on, and also were able to name and shame and punish and even exile freeloaders. That altruism to become a really unusual and particular human quality. Dacher Keltner's work at Greater Good Science Center, Born to be Good, his beautiful book about the evolution of compassion. There's another book, Survival of the Kindest. There are two places here. I read Atlas Shrugged 4 times. Here I am talking about autonomy and competence. I'm a big believer in self-reliance and along with compassion and a seeking of justice. But alongside looking out for our individual interest, it is our nature to have compassion for others, to hold them in our heart, and very often those qualities of compassion and empathy lead people to be spectacular leaders. I think you can be a good leader if you're fairly sociopathic and you've learned how to fake it, but you can't be a great leader. You're not going to be a spectacular leader. To be a spectacular leader, you really have to be able to hold other people in your heart because they can feel it. Do you know the structure, Shankar? Probably you do, from Martin Buber of 3 kinds of relationships: I, thou, I, it, and it. Okay, I, thou is you and I right now. We don't know each other super duper well. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm not trying to use you as an it, as a means to my ends. But on the other hand, sometimes we know what it's like. We're talking to someone, airline reservations, and they're a person, but basically they just are serving a function for us. Okay. And then it is like people in an elevator, side by side. Fine. Well, we know what it feels like to be itted by another person. Even if they're talking the talk, I grew up in around Hollywood, whatever, they're all smiley, you can feel it. When they're not prepared to let you in their heart. They're not prepared to actually register what it's like to be you, even if they have to scold you or critique you or give you a bad performance review or even lay you off. We know what it feels like when someone has put us out of their heart. And we also know what it feels like when someone includes us in their heart, even as they have to do their job, which might have negative impacts on us. We know the difference. We're just not going to super perform for someone who can't be bothered to hold us in their heart in some way. And that's why those people are not spectacular leaders.
I had no idea what all this talk about feeling was before I started meditating. You mentioned a few good references, Decker Keltner's work on Born to Be Good
Yeah.
or the survival of the kindest. And I'm reminded of the Heart Math Institute's work
Mm,
on feeling the electromagnetic waves that are generated by the heart and how we can feel each other's attention to each other, caring,
yeah.
and so on. And these are not just woo woo things, they can actually be shown using instruments now. Tell us a little bit about the Global Compassion Coalition, what its
Mm,
goals are, and how things are happening, and
mm.
how people can join.
Oh, thank you very much. The simple idea is that the more people we are grounded in caring about suffering and the desire to relieve suffering, including to change its systemic, structural causes like poverty. It's just kind of shocking that nearly 1 child in 5 in America lives below the poverty line. Whatever we might think about their parents and the choices they may or may not have made in their own lives, these kids are innocent. And poverty really tracks all kinds of issues and consequences that then become very expensive for society and also undermine a really capable and well educated and motivated workforce. So there are many things that we need to come together about to change for the better in the world. And so, this notion of the Global Compassion Coalition is that across our differences, what joins us together? Let's feed children. 10,000 kids a day die of hunger. Let's make sure that we're regulating things like AI and nuclear weapons. And so that's the broad picture. Inside that frame, the Global Compassion Coalition is a young nonprofit. We're about a year old. We're now entering our second year. We already have about 130,000 members, including many distinguished founding supporters like Shankar, as well as founding organizations like the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. Over time, we're becoming a really unique worldwide hub of resources for 4 things: the study, training, application, and advocacy of compassion on the global stage, with an associated coalition that's growing by about 1,000 people and organizations a week. So you can learn more. Just go to the webpage, theglobalcompassioncoalition.org. I invite you to join us. I invite you to support us. One of the things that I'm extremely interested in is claiming the power we do have to foster coalitions in the mid-range between government policy and individual consciousness and action. But for example, coalitions of businesses that are committed to things like taking into account and having compassion for, in a real way, their staff, including thousands and thousands of employees, or orienting to the world in a way, let's say, that reduces their carbon footprint, and forming alliances of different kinds, or being committed to children in school developing emotional intelligence, not just, which is really useful in their career, not conceptual intelligence. So when these alliances of various kinds form, they can really make a big difference. And I'm really interested, for example, in alliances that we're starting to seed and catalyze and foster of corporations and businesses of various kinds that are committed to compassionate leadership in ways that actually are real, and forming an alliance of corporations that are like that.
Now, I have seen how technology can be used for the greater good. For example, the course created by the Greater Good Science Center, which was given out through the UC Berkeley MOOC on the
Yeah.
science of happiness, has gone to more than 100,000 people. Are there other ways in which technologies can be used for the greater good, for helping, supporting each other, alleviation of poverty, reducing wars? We're in the midst of quite a few wars right now.
I can think of several, and I'll try to say things that may not be so obvious. One is that at this point, there is a lot of best practices and skillful means for individuals to help them to be less anxious, less depressed, more able to regulate themselves in ways that both improve their well being and reduce healthcare costs and drains on the economy altogether. The know-how to improve well-being and resilience and develop inner skills is here. It's just not evenly distributed. So technology, apps, things like ChatGPT and other things like that can enable people increasingly to have their therapist in the phone. They know it's an AI, and yet the experiences they're having as they interact with it are actually really, really personally valuable. So I think that's one example. A second example is the way in which technology can join us together internationally and across divisions. We can start having experiences of what it's like to be other people who are really different. They're on the other side of the world, or they're on the other side of the political divide in their own country, but technology gives us a chance to really see what it's like for them and to be moved by that. Recently, I watched a documentary, The Biggest Night in Hollywood or something, in which people came together. I think it was around 1979. All these musical greats, Stevie, Bruce Springsteen, all these people came together to sing We Are the World that one night. And yet, through that technology, they raised millions and millions of dollars for famine in Africa at the time and really demonstrated that kind of possibility. I think that's really beautiful. The third thing is that I would love to see Google just post fact of the day. One of the great services to humanity is Wikipedia, the access to factual information. Reality does not have a political bias. Facts are facts. Obviously, facts need to be in context, but there are many, many facts that are highly relevant that many people don't know about. Technology and technology platforms, Meta, LinkedIn, Google, that have enormous reach could make a decision to post a fact of the day. Now, obviously, it would be a fact that's curated because they think that's important for people to understand. Like most people don't know that nearly 1 in 5 kids in America lives below the poverty line. That's a useful thing to know. Most people don't know that 10,000 children a day die of hunger worldwide. And there are other kinds of facts as well, like the actual crime rate is going down in America on the average. They don't know that. So that would be a third service that I think technology could really, really serve. Naming facts, particularly facts that are relevant to health and happiness, and learning how to live together as one giant human tribe, all 8 billion of us.
You said something really important here. Exactly as an individual sticks like Velcro to negative information, we see the exact same phenomenon growing through media, such as social networks.
Oh, yeah.
The number of actual crimes has decreased significantly worldwide and definitely in the United States for sure. Yet, every single negative fact now gets broadcast to millions of people, making it look like there's crime everywhere and
Yeah.
therefore increasing anxiety and paranoia.
Yeah.
Is there some way we can bring about a balance? The
Um,
same thing with wars. The last century saw the First World War and the Second World War. Many, many tribes were killed off in the last few hundred years, including many Native Americans.
yeah.
Today, it's not genocide, yet it appears that way. It looks
Mm.
like there's a global amygdala that is
Yes.
going completely out of control.
Yeah, I think that's extremely astute. It is really true to think about global consciousness in a certain kind of metaphorical way. Yeah, it really helps for people who are consumers to know this. It would be wonderful if the people who create the algorithms inside social media, how old is social media now, really? Incredibly young, incredibly new. We're totally not used to it. In our hunter-gatherer band of 40, 50 people who saw each other every day for their entire lifetime, gossip was regulated. Freeloaders, people who were just horrible trolls, they got punished. There were consequences for that that regulated them inside the band. But now we're not able to punish freeloaders, in effect, social freeloaders who just dump and take. We don't have any way to do that. So then, boom, they proliferate. My request would be that those who construct the algorithms on Meta and X or Twitter and so on would take more responsibility for correcting for the amygdala hijack. Engagement tends to increase around anything negative, and then the algorithm just starts feeding any kind of engagement and becomes in a vicious cycle. So that would be one thing to do. The other thing would be to just take deliberate efforts much as at the individual level, it's vitally important to deal with the bad, turn to the good, take in the good, those three. We need to deliberately turn to the good to compensate for the brain's negativity bias, the way that it over-focuses on and overreacts to and over-learns and remembers negative material. So we have to take autonomy and competence individually to compensate for that. And my work very much is about how to gradually train the brain, literally, structurally, so that it becomes more and more like Velcro for beneficial experiences that grow good things inside. The question becomes, how can we regulate our systems to do the same? How can we regulate search anywhere to do the same? And to me, that's a great challenge. And I would love to see that. Like I said, I read Atlas Shrugged 4 times. I have a lot of belief in markets and individual choice. At the end of the day, I'm not trying to control people. I'm against bullies. I'm against tyrannies. We got rid of one king 250 years ago. I don't want to add kings to America. But the question becomes how to do it, because if we don't do it, we're going to be in big trouble. And one of the signs of that already is that rates of depression in teenagers in America, who on the whole are much more affluent than teenagers a generation ago, the levels of depression and despair are dramatically rising. And probably one of the sources of that is social media. Both the way in which it promotes disconnection. People go on a date with each other, and yet they're texting their friends under the table. They're not really present with each other. Parents are texting, and they're looking at their phones instead of being with their children at the park, and especially for teenagers. So I think we have to be really careful about the effects of all this, and we're already seeing some of the harms, particularly in our politics.
I'm confident that people eventually move in a direction that's good for them and therefore good for all of us. Like democracy evolved out of thousands of years of other experiments and many other cooperative things. Now, you have written many things, writings as well as offerings in the past. Which one would you say gave you the most joy, and which one was the most effective to people who used your tools?
Hmm. Well, I appreciate that question. So I've written 7 books, and like a parent, I love all my children, but I like one the best. And the one I like the best, frankly, is the most, I would say, hardcore neurodharma. When we're trying to get good at something, we want to study people who are already excellent at it. So if I want to get good at tennis, I'm going to watch Roger Federer or Serena Williams, Venus Williams. I'm a longtime rock climber. I'll watch people who are really good climbers. You and I were talking about climbing before we started here, and get better by watching them. Well, if we're interested in the upper reaches of human potential, let's study the people who've gone really far, who are, as Richie Davidson put it, like the Olympic athletes of mental training. So in that book, Neurodharma, I looked at 7 qualities that are really perfected at the highest level of enlightenment, frankly, and which we can develop ourselves. Steadiness of mind, lovingness of heart, a sense of fullness already, equanimity, that's number 3. And then number 4, feeling whole and complete as you are. Number 5, really being in the present. Number 6, feeling connected to everything. And then number 7, the ultimate, having an intuition, even a felt sense of timelessness, the infinite. And so those 7 are actually matched with growing research to changes in your brain. So as we cultivate these 7 qualities, we're drawing on neural circuitry and activities in the brain, which we can then deliberately foster. And then we get those neurons firing together. So then we start to hardwire steadiness, lovingness, fullness, wholeness, and so forth into our own brain. So Neurodharma, that's my favorite. It's scientifically grounded. It's got a million footnotes. I'm a references kind of person. I want the proofs. They're definitely there. But it really is ambitious. It really goes for it. So I think the people who've engaged that have definitely said they've gotten a lot out of it. Yeah.
I've missed that one and I'm going to read it for sure.
That one would be right up your alley, Shankar.
You mentioned that an intuitive self of timelessness is a very precious thing. What kind of neurological changes happen when you start seeing beyond the confines of time into the timeless?
That's a fantastic question. It's really tricky. Like I could look out over your shoulder and have a sense of sort of timelessness, the ocean's been here. I'm having an experience of timelessness inside ordinary reality, inside the Big Bang universe. And I'm observing something in the Big Bang universe that's starting to foster that experience of timelessness. That's categorically distinct from God, however we mean that word, right? Now, some might say, forget about it, bud. All there is the Big Bang universe. And inside that Big Bang universe, it's good to have experiences of awe and timelessness. Fine. Other people would say, well, actually, there really is something or other, a mystery, a something or other, that's categorically distinct from the conditioned, time-bound, unfolding Big Bang universe. And as the Buddha put it a long time ago, in that my mind delights. They would say that. Now, I don't get into arguments about whether there is or is not that, I'll call it transcendental aspect to things. I'll say that for many people, that's an extremely important part of their life, and it's a major source of their own well-being and resilience and even functioning at work. I was thinking of Brock Purdy, the 49ers quarterback, a young quarterback who's a deeply devout Christian and who's not pushing it on anybody, but he's basically saying, I'm in touch with something that for me at least, Brock Purdy, is fundamental, and that helps me handle being picked last in the NFL draft and suddenly thrust into the spotlight and playing in the Super Bowl. Like, whoa. That's an important distinction. How the brain inside the Big Bang universe might be affected by that which might be categorically distinct from that universe, that's a whole huge question. And some would argue that it's beyond our understanding, certainly. There is increasing study of people who are very unusual. I mean, they are like Olympic gold medalists. They're unusual, but they exist, who've had profound and transformative experiences that for them are about that which is meaningfully transcendental. And increasingly in science, we're actually able to study their brains. The problem is that even the best technology is very gross. The resolution of an fMRI is about a cubic millimeter, maybe a little less. But in that cubic millimeter, you could pack hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of synapses, the little junctions rather, between neurons. So when you look closely at the brain of someone who's got 10, 20, 30,000 lifetime hours of meditation, they're clearly somebody who has really just rested in the unconditioned, the infinite. Their brain looks a lot like mine or yours, just a regular person. There's a lot of similarity. But what you start to see is that there's a kind of imperturbability to them. For example, before receiving an electric shock, they know is coming and will be painful. They're completely undisturbed. And then while experiencing it, their brain activates. They still feel pain. But then after the pain has ended, they come back to baseline extremely rapidly. And that's, for example, a certain kind of a finding. You also find that the circuitry of so-called self becomes a lot quieter, a lot more distributed. There's a much more expansive sense of self. And also, it's very interesting that we tend to cycle back and forth in our perceptual processing between egocentric frames of what's it got to do with me and what's called allocentric, where you're just with things as they are impersonally. People can observe that if you bring your gaze near your body, like I'm looking at you, it's fairly close, my computer's right here, that tends to promote that self-referential, perceptual frame. But if we raise our gaze to the horizon or even above, like say to the heavens, get a bird's eye view, perspective on things, you will notice that your experience of yourself shifts immediately to become more open, less beleaguered, more big picture, less taking things personally. And with practice, people can activate those allocentric networks so that they have more of a sense of interbeing, interdependent connection with everything. I'm very excited to be alive at this time, and I appreciate technology for that because neuroscience is a baby science, and the study of the upper reaches of human potential, 20 years old, maybe 25, really, really, really young. And so it's thrilling that we all get to participate at this time. We're all experimenters, actually, at this time. I'm delighted to be alive, and I wish I could live another 10,000 years.
Neuroscience has been the most exciting thing that I studied over the past 10 years. To people out there, many of my friends are AI scientists. There's a lot going on. And before we make claims that AI is going to take over, let's realize that our understanding of our own brains is very limited as of
Mm,
now.
yeah,
Neuroscience is still a very young baby science.
yeah,
And as we learn more about our brains using better technology, better methods, we will become more adept with how we can use our brains in a meaningful way and maybe create even better technology. We have a long way to go. And in the meantime, let's use the tools that are at our disposal.
mm,
And thank you, Rick. It's such a
mm.
delight to hear you. I've
Oh,
been
it's
an
fun.
ardent fan of many of your books,
Yeah,
along with those of Dacker, Richie Davidson. And to people out there, yes, besides AI, machine learning, clouds, I'm interested in the clouds within our mind, the neuroscience of what makes us tick, the
yeah,
edges within our brains, and
yeah,
how far we can go.
yeah,
Please come forward. Let's have a chat. Let's talk about all these things. It's a wonderful world we live in.
yeah.
Thanks again, Rick.
Thank you.